Good morning. Oh, I can't hear you.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. I've been aware that our various traditions in the Plum village lineage are all meshing here together. We've got the east coast of, well, not coast, but eastern part of Canada, the western part of Canada, and some of the representations of the United States. All of us use the bells in different ways to mean different things. And it isn't limited to region. Every time I go to Deer Park, I got a new routine of what they're going to do with bells and whistles. And the bells really are a communicator, like the drums in Africa, or perhaps the drums in Canada or the United States. They tell us where we're at in a service and what we're doing with our body and our minds. So apologies for those of you who are steeped in tradition and are confused by the variety of interpretations of bells. Tradition is really important. It's part of our grounding, familiarity, even though we know impermanence is everywhere. A little bit of predictability is very nice for the nervous system. And so we want to make sure we're rooted in tradition, that it isn't fly-by-night. With time, tradition can become fossilized and rigid and brittle. And at the time that our teacher entered the monastery, Buddhism had almost lost its meaning for the end of suffering being practical to the people around him. He had a tremendous faith, looking at history and seeing how Buddhism had pulled the Vietnamese people out of a great suffering hundreds of years prior to Thich Nhat Hanh entering the monastery. And he knew in his heart that it could be revised to help the massive amount of suffering that was the Vietnamese experience from the hundred years of French occupation and hundreds of years of occupation prior to that, for the issues of communism coming from the north and rivers of 100,000 people fleeing from the north to the south, and the immense famine that created bodies lying in the streets all over the place, and soldiers raiding even the monastery for rice, causing that famine. There was just a cascade of suffering without very much support from Buddhist philosophy and practice. So Thai took incredible risks to boldly revive Buddhism to be practical, to take it out into the streets, into the villages that were bombed and destroyed over and over and over again. And he was a force of nature along with Sister Chung-Kong. How he could have written so many books and articles and poetry and magazines, and also created a school for youth and social service of 10,000 young people, and a Buddhist university and a training for monks and nuns, and the beginnings of our order, all at once. It's phenomenal. And meanwhile, his colleagues, his buddies, were dying left and right, being persecuted. The Catholic Church was persecuting the Buddhists, trying to keep their power in Vietnam. So Thai had, he also created a community, a refuge where he could get away from the unrelenting stress. Because as you remember, we're not made for unrelenting stress. We're made for intermittent stresses. Our nervous system can't handle it, and neither could Thai's. Thai suffered from depression many times, sometimes to the degree that he needed to be hospitalized. But he had a faith in practice and in himself that he could discover what worked for his nervous system to be regulated enough to really be mindful. So he was balancing rooted tradition with courageous innovation. And that's really what our nervous system can be if we know how to navigate it. So I want to play a song, and it's, perhaps you've heard it or seen it. It goes along with the video from Plum Village. It's one of Thai's poems called Little Star. And it begins with three nuns, one on guitar, one holding a telephone to look at the words. They're both Vietnamese. The guitar player wrote the song, not the words, but the music. And a Japanese nun playing violin. And they're in a room that when I see the picture, it's a renovated, I think, of the old a renovation of the old meditation hall in New Hamlet, where there's this, it's all cobblestone, and there's this big niche carved out of the wall of cobblestone in which a Buddha sits. And back up are a cellist, a monk, somebody with a big electronic thing in front of them. So they've got this ancient building, these Vietnamese nuns, the English cello player, the French guy who's got all the electronics, and little Phapu, the abbot of Upper Hamlet, and great, huge, black American I-born rapper or hip-hop person. And this is really, for me, holding tradition and bold innovation And Thai has really encouraged us to do both. And we have to find what is the balance for us in any one moment. So I want to play it for you and just allow it to penetrate, if it works.
I'm going to go through the speaker. We couldn't find the plug.
Where's the sound coming from?
Is that the sound?
Yeah.
Oh.
They're walking through the forest to the meditation home.
Today, the kingdom of heaven held a festival for thousands of stars.
Is it working?
Yes, but I interfered with it.
Okay. It's just loading.
Is this absurd?
It's the balance of tradition and innovation.
I like absurd. That's a good post.
You're in a good crowd.
There you go.
Today, the kingdom of heaven held a festival for thousands of stars. I went up to the kingdom, knelt down and prayed that the anguish, the killing, the disaster in our poor land would end. Where have you been, little star? I've been looking for you everywhere, out of my window, among the dark clouds. Where have you
heart for resistance. I've been searching in the self for existence. All alone by myself, reminiscing underneath the Bodhi tree, but it isn't only me. You and I, collective energy. How it's supposed to be. I hope to be the ocean tide with my spirit open wide, standing on a mountaintop. See the world with open eyes. I was so surprised to know that I'm a part of this. Sunrise, sunset, rain clouds, all of it. The journey of awakening, taking it with one step, one breath. Same for all beings till there's none left. Suffering is painful, but I'm still the same fool, searching for the river while I'm swimming in the same pool. Maybe we can find it, keep the light shining, walking on the path of ancestors behind me. If you could be the person who you are in your heart, would you grow a little bit, or would you play a bigger part? Love is a paintbrush, life is the biggest art, and I'm still the same kid, wishing on a little star. Love is a paintbrush, life is the biggest art, and I'm still the same kid, wishing on a little star.
I've
I've heard that song so many times, and every time the hip hop piece, the rap piece comes on, it just busts me open. And I like to play that for this talk, not just to open up you folks, but to open me up so that this talk doesn't become too heady. You know, you all filled out a questionnaire about your own personal histories and stresses and difficulties. And reading them all was very sobering. So we have this thing called trauma. And one definition of trauma is not what happened to you, but how it's held in your body and your memory. That being stressed and bumped out of your window is not trauma. We're made for that. We're made to have ourselves activated or diffused as protection, and it works pretty well under certain circumstances. But our nervous system isn't made for unrelenting stresses or what is perceived as unrelenting stresses. So the kind of life we live where the frown from a supervisor could set off terror, that's not what our nervous system understands. It doesn't understand racism, where if certain people walk down the street, they receive look after look after look as if they don't belong, or that they're foreign, weird, scary, stupid, primitive, whatever. We're not made to be impoverished for long periods of time. We're not made for not belonging in whatever ways, collective or individual, that message comes to us. So we go out of the window, come back in. We go out of the window, we come back in. After a while, that's a default mechanism in us. We go out of the window, we stay stuck. Even when there's no threat or even a perceived threat, we're just stuck there until we're so burnt out that we just crash. And then we think there's something wrong with us, that we're broken, that we're defective, that we're not lovable, that we're not capable. But that's really not the case. The case is that human beings cannot live in the kind of culture that we've created for ourselves. So there's the things that happen to us, and then there's the way it's held in our body. And the way our memory works is that when something is overwhelming to our nervous system, all of the surrounding stimuli, all of the sounds and smells and images get remembered in a part of the body that promotes what we are going to do to stay safe. So the memory, the smell, is connected with the action to keep us safe. The image is connected with the action that keeps us safe, and it's automatic. There's no time to waste in being safe. When we experience things, when our executive functioning, our thinking brain is really in charge, then we remember things as a story set in time with a sequence, and we know what is going on. We see it in our mind's eye. We can remember who's there and what's happening, but we don't have an automatic response that makes us bold, that makes us angry, that makes us fearful, that makes us fuzzy-headed or apathetic or immobilized. So we get our buttons pushed. That's when we're tuning into something inside that is automatic, habitual response to threat. Now, there are all sizes of threats, and human beings have the need for the pack. We have the need for the tribe. So social threats of I don't like you, you don't belong, those are just as strong as the physical cues of, oh, there's a tornado coming, or there's I'm sick, or it's too cold. So it doesn't matter what you call it. When you're on automatic, whether you call it a trauma or you call it a habit or you call it a freak out, we've all got them. And in this room, almost everyone has something that's recognized as a big T trauma. So I want to ask you to stand up. Everybody just stand. And I'll say some things, and if it's true for you or for someone who raised you, then I would like you to sit down. So if you suffered from a natural disaster, or someone you were raised by suffered from a natural disaster, sit down. If you or your parents left a homeland for fear of their lives, please sit down. If someone in your family or you have suffered grave physical illness, life-threatening or chronic illness, please sit down. If you've suffered, or your parents or whoever raised you, from poverty or racism or religious oppression, please sit down. If you suffered, or someone in your family who raised you suffered from domestic violence, please sit down. Or drug abuse, should have said that long ago. If anyone here has suffered from too much privilege, and that's not a joke, please raise your hands. Thank you. Whatever you want to call it, trauma is a human inheritance. We all have it. We all have the same nervous system, pretty much. And therefore, the good news is we're learning how to regulate it so that we can identify when we're under unrelenting stresses and we're stuck out of our window, so that we can do something about it, because we can do something about it. And if we can't, we can get somebody to help us. It isn't rocket science. It's actually quite easy. I have a list here of simple trauma, cumulative trauma, too much, too long, too little, too long, complex trauma, when you've got more than one, generational trauma or intergenerational trauma. There's a kind of a joke about intergenerational passing things on at Thanksgiving. The tradition in a particular family was to roast a turkey, and when the three generations in the kitchen came together to roast the turkey, the middle generation tried to cut off the legs, the knobs that were sticking out, and the youngest one said, "What are you doing?" It's like, and the middle one said, "Well, I don't know." And so it just occurs to me, do Canadians eat turkey for Thanksgiving? I was trying to make it relevant to the moment, and it doesn't really quite fit. But anyway, so the middle generation turns to the older generation and says, "Why did you teach me to cut these off? I don't understand it." And the older generation said, "Because the lid wouldn't fit on the old pot. And so we had to cut those off to make it fit." But the story didn't come down, just the actions, just the tradition. So when somebody is born in trauma, and those parents teach the children what to do to stay safe, and those people, when they grow up, teach their children the same thing, even though the threat is no longer there, those children are taught the fear of what happens when you don't do that from the grandparents. And it continues on until somebody says, what are we doing? And learns how to undo that. And when you get your buttons pushed, there's an investigation that can happen if you have mindfulness. There's an investigation to unpack it, to be able to handle sitting with the body sensations, with the perceptions, with the thoughts that drive it. There's an art. That's what the song says, that love is a paintbrush and life is the greatest art. So when we have the capacity to love, to be mindful, then we can look at and unpack all these difficulties one at a time as meets our capacity. So we work on developing our capacity, developing our understanding, and learning how to bring ourselves back into that window enough so that we can explore the edges of the window and see, because the inside edge and the outside edge, they're not too different, except for the fact that one, you can maintain your mindfulness, and the other, you're on automatic. But in order to go from here, outside the window, to back in, it isn't always possible to go, oh, I think I will bring up a resource, because you're like this, and a resource is not going to be available. So then what do? You can't just sit and breathe, because your breathing is like this, and if you pay attention to that, you're in deep doo-doo, because you're telling yourself over and over again, I'm freaked out. Oh yeah, and feel it in your muscles. And that's really a negative reinforcement. So we're going to do a little experiment. Because the way we bring ourselves back in enough to be able to use these tools of grounding and breathing and anchoring and looking for parts of the body that have well-being or images and resources, is to go back to our senses, going back to what's absolutely simple. Like if your arms are just like super energized, you might need to push on a wall. Just push, until you start to feel your body calm. Or it might be that you will wrap up in a shawl and wrap up in something really tight to feel that sense of grounding. Or to take a drink of water or tea, or to feel the heat, or to perhaps put something really heavy right on your belly, or even to have somebody sit on you who's a trusted person, can be very regulating. So we've put up some pictures around the room. I think there should be 10 of them. What's that one look like? It's pushing on the wall. And then there's one behind you, Talon. What is that one? It's feel the temperature in the room. Hey, whoever did that was very clever. Very clever. Okay, that one there.
No, it wasn't me. It wasn't flowers.
That one says, pick out one color and search for it in your environment. And you just search as long as you need to to begin to feel that regulation, because that is trying to bring your cognitive back online. There's one for just hearing, just like, what are the pitches? What are the various sounds? What images come up when I hear them? There's one to take a drink, one to look for shapes. Okay, just whatever is round, that's round. Your eyeglasses are round, the bell is round, that kind of thing. There's wrapping up in a shawl over there. That one is doing something with your mind. If your mind is going like this, maybe you try and spell your name backwards, the whole name. Or you try to count backwards by 3s from 100, or by 7s from 1,000, or by 1s from 20, depending on how mathematically challenged you are. Are there any others? What's that one?
Inside or outside, notice the furniture, tree, wall, surface, and touch the surface.
Okay, textures, just feeling. So I'm going to hand out some little cards that have these things on them. And here's the instructions: to be done in silence. And you don't have to stand right in front of the thing, you just have to have it to remind you. To bring up some small difficulty. Enough so that you can, you feel it. But not so much that it's like one of those big events, raw events. So you stand in front of it, or you see it, and you say, okay, I'm bringing up how my partner doesn't answer the phone anymore. It's like, okay, circles, that one. But you hold on to this difficulty while you're doing it. Okay, she doesn't answer the phone. I'm always having to answer the phone. Okay, that one. Leaning against the wall, getting some support. That one's like leaning with your knees bent so that you're really pressing. So each one, you go to each one, you bring up the same difficulty, and you do the thing. And just notice which ones are effective for that moment, because different things are effective for different moments. But maybe take 10 minutes to do this, and then come back to your seat. And if you have a pen and you want to put a little note on there, the blank is for the things that you already do that might not be on this card. For instance, you might brush your hair, or put on hand lotion, or go for a run, or snuggle with an animal, whatever. You could put that here if you want to remind yourself. And in these 3 lines here, that's for people you want to tell what works for you in case you can't remember yourself. Okay? So maybe we pass these out.
Do you have pens?
Oh,
I'll go grab.
okay. Don't worry, you'll remember. You'll remember what works. So when you get it, I want you to make sure you try each one of these with a difficulty, and just notice how it feels in your body. Oops, I gave you the wrong thing.
Some of them are wrong. Some of them are different.
Yeah.
There's two.
Oh, they're all mixed up.
Sorry.
Ooh. That's the one. It says help now.
Okay.
Does anyone have
So,
tools?
I have This one I'm supposed to have?
Here's
No, you
some,
need to help now.
here's a whole bunch.
Yeah, you do that, I can give these back.
Okay. Are they gonna want the other ones too, or should we pass them back?
Oh, you can keep both of them.
Well,
I just wasn't planning on making a mistake. How many of us plan on making mistakes? Here's some more.
This one, this one. Against the wall or a tree.
So we'll do this in silence.
Uh-oh.
Hello, we're gonna do this in silence
Sorry.
because if there's a lot of commotion, it's really hard to tune in to those subtle messages. So you can begin with or without a pen.
Joanne, sorry, I forgot. Can you tell me what to put in the square and the lines?
Don't worry about that.
Okay. Just get going.
So I'm curious if you check back in with yourself in this difficulty. What do you notice now? Bring it alive. Does it seem the same as it did before? Does it seem more intense? What do you notice inside?
I'm kind of tired of it.
You mean it doesn't have the same,
It doesn't have the same punch.
how can you tell?
Well, I tried to bring it up and it was kind of like, bother.
Uh-huh.
So what?
Uh-huh. Anybody else have something similar to that? That's when you can go back and start to explore it. We had our sutra reading this morning about the five, I mean, there was a lot in there, but the five skandhas, the body, the feelings, meaning not emotions, but whether the perception of it is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The thoughts and the feelings about it and all of our senses. Then we explore one by one those elements. We can't do that when we're freaked out. So we use these to bring us back, and then we're exploring, which we'll do in a minute or 2 or 10. Anybody else have a comment about that experience? Some things work and some things don't. Josh?
At some point I felt like I was distracting myself. Is that okay, or is that?
No.
The idea.
Oh, I shouldn't distract myself by thinking like shapes. I should, that was
Right,
something my
right.
mind told me.
So this isn't for just every moment that you encounter something that you'd rather not encounter. This is not an escape. This is bringing you back into the window so that you can have the equanimity to explore what it is, or to relax into a new level of discomfort that could be okay, right? This is really a tool to bring us enough mindfulness to stay with what is. We are not trying to escape what is. But sometimes, in order to bring us back into the window, we need a distraction. So completely different. And sometimes we need to dive into it. For instance, sometimes pain just needs a distraction. And sometimes pain needs to go, okay, exactly what is the temperature of this? And in a way, that's distraction from the whole overwhelming piece. It takes it one little piece at a time. The goal, if we can use that word, the purpose is to bring us back with enough mindfulness to stay with it. But if it's too big, then keeping on being with something that's too big is going to make it bigger. It's going to add a level of stress that our nervous system just can't handle. And that's one of the reasons why we try not to stay, as if we could, in bliss all the time, right? Some people feel like, oh, I could just remove myself from my feelings and then I wouldn't have to, suffer. That actually brings me to the next point, which is there are some pitfalls to practice if you're not wise. For instance, you could learn to dissociate from your body. That can be helpful. It's a choice. But if you do that with everything, you make yourself more fragile, right? That there's I forget what part of the sutra it brought up today, but there's this curve of each quality that we try to cultivate. If we try to cultivate one-pointed attention, that's very important to be able to anchor ourselves and calm our minds. So if we start developing, we do practices that develop that one-pointedness, keep on bringing our attention back, keep on bringing our attention back. Pretty soon we're getting better at one-pointed attention. And at some point we hit an optimal level, we got it. And if you do that too much, you can actually have adverse side effects of becoming rigid, I gotta do this, becoming numb to our bodies because all we are is a nostril, So we have to know what the downsides are of every practice. Of loving kindness practice, there's a downside. You can become a raging an enabler. You can become burned out from a compassion meditation when you just can't hold any more suffering. Every practice has its balance. We're looking for a middle way. So being in touch with our bodies, being in touch with our emotions, being in touch with our surroundings, those are keys to whether we've done too much or too little. We can also have some kinds of pitfalls of thinking that we won't allow that to bother us, when really what it is that we're afraid of conflict, or we're afraid of anger, or we're afraid of being sad, or we're afraid of grieving, and we get stuck. But we telling ourselves we're transcending it, and that's called a spiritual bypass. These things are not all that common, but if you're somebody who tends to practice with the things that are easiest, you're already going on that curve. You're sooner going to go down this way. So just to be aware of that. Let's see, what other pitfalls? Also, as we become more relaxed, our defense mechanisms that are keeping certain experiences kind of under the rug can come up, and then all of a sudden we're having some image that is dysregulating. So there are ways to work with all of those things. It doesn't mean that practice, if you run into one of those, that you have to stop your practice. But practice was developed in the monastery in Asia. And the first thing they do is they work with the 5 mindfulness trainings, so the precepts, to help calm ourselves, to create a calmer inner life. Here in this country, we start right out with meditation, and maybe sometime down the line you take the precepts. So that's kind of backwards. It's also out of context of a teacher who really knows you and says, you feel kind of flat to me these days. What's going on with your meditation? And I would suggest you do this. So we need mentors. We need to make ourselves vulnerable to, this may not be working for me. It took me 20 years to tell my mentor, I can't follow my breathing. And she said, maybe you need a different tradition. It was like, wait a second, I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not stopping now. But that wasn't what I needed. So we need somebody who's wise enough to help us tailor-make the practice, because we've got all these different practices in our tradition, and some of them are right for us in any one moment, and some of them aren't. If you come from a family of abuse, and you sit right down and start meditating on your father as a 5-year-old child, that could be very difficult, especially without support. Some things need a lot of support. They need somebody who can hold the regulation within themselves so that you can co-regulate with it, no matter how intense it is. And that's when some kind of helping professional who's there with you as you do these very same things. That the leading edge therapies today are really body-centered and resource-centered therapies. And you can access that, especially in Canada, it's more accessible. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your practice. It just means you need a little help. I needed some help at times. Or it may be that you need to let the Sangha know, and in your Dharma sharing say, I can't do this, this is what happens. I'm wondering how other people practice with this. The number of really serious problems that happen from meditation practice, they haven't really tested yet on Plum Village tradition. Pretty much it's been the Zen, pure Zen tradition, mostly Goenka, and Tibetan tradition, and Zen Vipassana as Goenka, and Zen tradition, Soto Zen. So those are more intense practice traditions, and ours is really a smorgasbord of not doing too much in any one thing, keeping it moving. So, yes. So now that we know how to bring ourselves back into the window, I want to say, well, what's next? How do we really work with some of these difficulties? First, you have to assess your capacity. If each time you try to work with the difficulty, you find you're getting dysregulated quite quickly, quicker than you think you ought to be, then maybe you need to really focus on just watering those wholesome seeds of well-being. But chances are there are at least some small things that you can work on as we did this exercise of looking more deeply. We talk about stopping, calming, and then looking deeply. And it's, to me, a little bit like roasting a marshmallow. You know, you take the thing and you stick it on something like your cushion, and you are going to set an intention to roast this marshmallow in a way that will make it golden brown on the outside and soft on the inside. And you know, if you take that marshmallow and you just stick it in the flame, it's going to be a black, ashy mess. And it's not going to be palatable for anybody. So what you do is you ground in your wholesome well-being. You get a really strong sense of that, whatever it takes. And then you begin to explore the edges as if you're putting the marshmallow just the right distance from the heat. And you keep watching it. You keep watching your body. Keep watching the body of the marshmallow. As it gets a little brown, you bring it out, back to the resource, back to the well-being. You're going in and out of the flame. And perhaps you start out, depending on you, you start out with the body. Okay, I'm bringing this issue up. What do I notice in my body? Where? Or maybe just, what do I notice in my, if this is the biggest part of the reaction, what do I notice in my feet? Inch your way up. Hold it. Hold the image of whatever it is you're dealing with, the story. And when you feel it in your body, see if you can be curious. And when curiosity fades into something more like fear or anxiety or anger or numbness, you bring it back to that sense of well-being. And then you try again. Maybe your curiosity will last for 3 seconds this time, noticing, where else do I feel it in my body? And after a while, which may be a minute, or it may be a year, or something in between, you kind of know that. It's not so daunting anymore. Maybe you look at another aspect of it. What about the image? What are you telling yourself? Oh, okay. What else are you telling yourself? Oh, and then I can feel my body tense up. Go back to the well-being. So you're going in and out of the flame. You're turning the marshmallow to different aspects. And as you encounter that, it becomes less and less reactive and more consciously, I know you, as the Buddha says, I know you, Mara. Now, you don't have a hold on me. Do I enjoy you? Not yet, but I can handle it. I can sit here and breathe or feel my solidity or focus on a part of my body that's good enough to distract me when it's too much, and then handle it and stretch that window so that a fear that here's my window and the fear that is here and I don't have control over myself, I can begin to handle that same amount of sensation in my body without feeling dysregulated. I know it. Yeah, it's not pleasant, but it's okay. And eventually, some things that were annoying, like the sound of the air, can actually become resources of confidence that you can, little by little, chip away or brown up this marshmallow. I keep forgetting. But I think this is a good time for the song that we have words for. And how many of you are familiar with this song?
I just want to make sure there weren't enough, so we might need to share. Oh, yeah.
Anybody ever heard this song? Oh, yay,
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay,
King.
so we're gonna, this is from The King and I, by Rogers and Hammerstein. Deborah Kerr. She's this very proper English tutor, is that right? And she goes to Siam, Thailand, and she starts to be intimidated by the king, I think, whose son may be her charge. And so she sings this song. Whenever I feel afraid, I hold my head erect and whistle a happy tune so no one will suspect I'm afraid. While shivering in my shoes, I strike a careless pose and whistle a happy tune so no one ever knows I'm afraid. The result of this deception is very strange to tell, for when I fool the people I fear, I fool myself as well. I whistle a happy tune, and every single time the happiness in the tune convinces me that I'm not afraid. Make believe you're brave, and the trick will take you far. Make believe you're brave, as you make believe you are. Now we whistle. Make believe you're afraid. You may be as brave as you make believe you are. Okay. You know, Ty says, put a half smile on your face. This is the same stuff. Yeah. He didn't say that to be a fake. Okay. Tonight we're going to roast marshmallows. And we're going to focus on those stories where we turned actually something very adverse into a resource. Because the vast majority of big bad things that happen to us, eventually we overcome enough so that not only don't they push us out of our window, but they help us gain virtues that we didn't know we had or that weren't as strong. A number of years ago, I was living in in southern Mexico, and I became very ill, and every night I had a panic attack. And I had those panic attacks every single night for about 2 years. And it got so that I really didn't want to go to sleep. Eventually, I found out what that was and got much better, much better. But the experience, one was that I came to be able to handle the sensations that were happening without so much fear. And I've used that bazillion times since then. I've also been much more compassionate with people who have chronic, difficult physical conditions, and I find that I have so much more energy to offer support for that, and so much more insight on what's helpful and what's not. I also am so happy every morning that I wake up and that I haven't had one of those. It's like, yes, it's another day. So that the takeaways, I wouldn't choose to do that again. But the takeaways are really there. And we don't get to choose the big bad things that happen to us, hardly ever. But we do need to look back on those things and appreciate what we took away. So tonight, around the campfire, while we're roasting our marshmallows, I'm going to invite some of you to look at what you took away and share it with us. And we share those stories in a way that don't re-traumatize us. So this is an English lesson. You have the dependent clause and you have the independent clause. And it depends on which one you do first. So when I lived in southern Mexico and was very ill for a long time, that's the dependent clause. I overcame it, and these are the things that I took away. I took away an increased compassion and an ability to focus on my body. And so I'm amplifying the wholesomeness that came, and I'm telling the story in just a brief enough way so you can appreciate it without me going into my head and seeing it all and feeling it all in my body and actually antagonizing that emotional system again, re-traumatizing myself. So, how's that for an explanation? Okay. One more thing, I think, before we end, before the walking meditation, is that tomorrow during the ceremony, there's two main parts. Well, there's three main parts. There's four main parts. Of the vows, there are two main parts. One is the refuge vows. That is making a vow to, when we're in a pickle, or as we live our life, we return to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha for spiritual support, emotional support, transformational support. The taking refuge in the Buddha means knowing that you too are a human with the same nervous system as all of those people who have learned to transcend suffering and live in more of a state of well-being. You have that potential. Taking refuge in the Dharma means using these practices to bring you into the window and really look at your suffering in order to transform it and in order to help transform the suffering of others. Taking refuge in the Sangha means you step out of the illusion or the illusion that you can do this alone. You're a human being. You need your people. And you might find those people at work. You might find them in the living room. You might find them in the Sangha. But you do not do these things alone. So the taking refuge in those three things makes you a student of the Buddha. Does that mean that you're not your root tradition anymore? Absolutely not. Thai is very clear. Really explore your root tradition. Don't let go of it. See where these practices embellish your root tradition. See where these practices are no different than your root tradition. For me, it was a real avenue to return to my roots because I could see what the purpose of those things that I hadn't been explained, what that was through the Buddhist lens. So those of you who will be receiving the 5 mindfulness trainings also have the option to take refuge in the 3 jewels, these 3 Dharma, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So that's an option. In Plum Village, they've taken that out. And you think, wow, it's so fundamental. Why have they taken it out? Because they have decided that it's more important to have more people take the 5 mindfulness trainings without hesitation. Because the practices, when you take them out of that context of the 5 mindfulness trainings, can be used in the military to be more accurate with your who you shoot and who you don't, or it can be used in being a really clever pickpocket. Mindfulness is a tool and a path, but it's only a path when you use it with the 5 mindfulness trainings, whether you take them formally or not, or when you take the mindfulness practice outside of an ethical framework. And that framework might vary from one root tradition to another, but they actually don't that much. So, yeah, no, that's tomorrow. We talk about what happens if we use these practices outside of an ethical framework. So I think that's it for now, except for one more song. This is just pretty funny. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all be that way, that chill?
Yeah.
Funniest quotes.
I think we should do some dog meditation.
Yes.
Perfect yoga pose.
I couldn't help but take that picture.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Okay. So this is a song by a fellow named Peter Alsop. And this one is entitled No One's Normal. You know, we've really misused the word normal to mean perfect, right? Oh, this one's not normal. This person is not normal. That really means they're not perfect in a certain way. Yeah.
No one's normal, you know that. Everyone's a little bat. No one's normal, you can't see. We're all a little crazy. You know somebody who's completely normal through and through. They're hiding all their crazy stuff. You just don't know them well enough. Sarah clips her fingernails and saves them in a little box. Willie says he talks to whales, and Allison wears plastic socks. Hector likes bean curds and sardines, eats them when there's no one there. Susan sleeps out in the garden, Tony will not comb his hair. Arthur has to have 12 crackers every time, no more, no less. Darlene loves the Green Bay Packers, Billy Joe prefers grass. Charlene thinks her knees look ugly, Wendell's nose is always sore. Dino's pants fit him too snugly, Mike eats popcorn off the floor. No one's normal, you know that. Everyone's a little cat. No one's normal, look and see. We're all a little crazy. You know you're special down inside, but there's some things you've learned to hide from all the other people who are hiding special things from you. Megan burps from ginger ale, Willow likes to suck on soap, Franklin is a tattletale, and Rachel knows your horoscope. Jackie breathes with her mouth open, Sam's allergic to clean clothes, Dinah wants to be the Pope, Sanford always picks his nose, Walter sweats when he drinks water, Mary Jo blinks all the time, Ann will hug you for a quarter, Matt will kiss you for a dime. Tanya's leg will not relax, Heather has no little toe, Howard's ears are full of wax, and Andy aches on yellow snow. Angela acts rich and snooty, Phyllis is the teacher's pet, Horace always does his duty, Greta screams when she gets wet. Barry built some giant speakers, and now he doesn't hear too well. Olive sleeps in her old sneakers, she thinks that her feet don't smell. No one's normal, you know that. Everyone's a little rat. No one's normal, you can see. We're all a little crazy. I love the special ways we are, so strange and different, so bizarre. I'm glad there's no one else like me, 'cause one's enough, don't you agree? Come on, no one's normal, you know that. Everyone's a little rat. No one's normal, you can see. We're all a little crazy.
Stretch your legs. We'll have one bell to stand, one bell to bow to each other, and one bell to bow for sharing the merit.